What if the games you played could predict the future, not just the outcome of a friendly wager, but the fate of kings and queens? Picture this: a royal court in medieval Europe, where laughter and dice rolls suddenly turn to hushed whispers as a game's result eerily mirrors the sudden illness of a monarch. These weren't just stories. They were real moments that sent shockwaves through history, leading rulers to ban games, not for their violence or vice, but for their uncanny ability to foreshadow tragedy. Today, we're diving into 25 medieval games that were outlawed because they seemed to predict royal deaths, uncovering a world where playthings became prophecies and entertainment carried a deadly weight. Think about the power of superstition in an age where the line between the natural and the supernatural was blurred. A misplaced chess piece, an unlucky roll of the dice, or a seemingly innocent card drawn at the wrong moment. These weren't just bad luck. To medieval minds, they were omens, signs of divine displeasure or impending doom. Kings and queens, already living under the constant threat of assassination, rebellion, or illness, saw these games as dangerous tools that could destabilize their rule or even foretell their downfall. And so they did what any powerful person would do: they banned them. But behind every prohibition lies a story, a moment of fear, intrigue, or even a chilling coincidence that history hasn't forgotten. From chess variants believed to mirror battlefield fatalities to dice games that allegedly predicted the exact day a monarch would die, these forbidden pastimes offer a window into a world where games were more than diversion. They were seen as portals to the unknown. As we explore these 25 banned games, you'll discover how something as simple as a wooden board or a hand-painted card could spark panic in the hearts of the powerful. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a journey into the shadows of medieval courts where the stakes of play were life and death. So settle in, because what you're about to uncover might just change how you see the games we play today. To truly grasp why medieval rulers feared these games, we have to step into their world, one where every shadow could hide a sign from the divine. Imagine living in an era where a sudden storm wasn't just bad weather but a warning from heaven, where a comet streaking across the night sky wasn't just a celestial event but a portent of doom. For medieval people, the universe spoke in riddles, and games with their rules, their randomness, their uncanny way of mirroring life's twists and turns became one of its most unsettling languages. Royals didn't just see chessboards and dice, they saw reflections of their own fragile power, where a single move could symbolize betrayal. A roll of the dice might hint at an heir's untimely death, and the wrong card drawn could foreshadow a kingdom's collapse. Take the story of King Louis VI of France, who reportedly banned a popular dice game after a courtier's throw predicted the exact date of his son's fatal hunting accident. Coincidence to modern eyes, perhaps, but in an age where physicians consulted the stars before prescribing medicine and where dreams were treated as divine messages, these weren't mere chance events. They were pieces of a larger celestial puzzle, one that could topple thrones if misread. Even the church weighed in, warning that games could invite demonic influence or tempt fate. It wasn't just about fun, it was about survival. When a nobleman's chess match eerily reenacted a recent battlefield loss, or a card game seemed to predict a queen's miscarriage, rulers had no choice but to act. Banning these games wasn't just superstition, it was crisis management. This mindset explains why the first game on our list, the infamous Tables of Fate, sent shockwaves through royal courts. Played on an ornate board with carved pieces representing knights, bishops, and kings, it was said that the arrangement of the pieces at the game's end could reveal the order of deaths in a royal family. When the young Prince Edward of England died suddenly of fever just days after a game's outcome showed his peace toppled by a black knight, the king ordered every copy burned. To us, it might seem like a tragic coincidence, but to a medieval monarch, it was proof some games didn't just entertain, they prophesied. The royal dice of doom wasn't just any game, it was a whispered terror in the halls of power. Imagine ivory dice carved with symbols instead of numbers, tumbling across a velvet-lined table as nobles held their breath. A roll of 3 serpents could mean illness. 2 crowned skulls, rebellion. But when the dice landed in a sequence matching the king's exact age, the room would fall silent. That wasn't just bad luck, it was a death sentence written in bone. This wasn't mere paranoia. In 1342, Byzantine Emperor John VI reportedly played a round where the dice showed his age, 39, alongside a single skull. Within weeks, he collapsed during a feast, dead from a sudden fever. The game's reputation spread like wildfire, reaching French and English courts where superstitious rulers kept court astrologers on hand to interpret roles. Some historians believe the dice were subtly weighted, manipulated by factions seeking to sow fear or manipulate succession. Others argue the predictions were hindsight. Once a monarch died, people retroactively connected the dots to a memorable role. But the damage was done. By 1400, possession of these dice could get you hanged in Venice, where the Doge declared them tools of treason. In Spain, Queen Isabella ordered them burned after a courtier's playful role mirrored her husband Ferdinand's fatal bout of gout. What made this game uniquely dangerous wasn't just its symbolism, it was the illusion of control. Unlike tarot or star charts, dice required no priest or scholar to interpret. The message was horrifyingly simple: the numbers never lied. Now, picture a chessboard where the pieces don't just represent armies, they mirror the court's darkest fears. The next game on our list, known as The King's Fall, took the strategic elegance of chess and twisted it into something far more sinister. The prophet's chess wasn't just a game, it was a living, breathing oracle. Imagine a chessboard where every piece bore the carved likeness of a real monarch, their advisors, even rival nobles. A knight's advance wasn't just a tactical move, it signaled an impending betrayal. The fall of a queen piece, that wasn't checkmate. To superstitious medieval minds, it was a death omen whispered across the board. What made this game so explosive was its eerie precision. In 1399, chroniclers recorded a match played in King Richard II's court where the Black King piece, carved in his exact likeness, was cornered by rebel pawns. Days later, Henry Bolingbroke staged the coup that would overthrow him. Coincidence, maybe, but when another game in Burgundy predicted a duke's assassination by showing his piece struck down by a bishop, authorities smashed every set they could find. The real terror lay in how easily the game could be weaponized. Unlike dice or cards, chess required deliberate moves, allowing players to stage prophetic outcomes. Ambitious lords hired master players to manipulate matches, using the results to sow fear or justify rebellions. Even the colors held meaning: white for purity, black for treachery. So when a Spanish princess's white queen fell to a black knight during her wedding festivities, the match was halted and the game banned by royal decree. But perhaps the most chilling detail, the prophet's chess didn't just foreshadow death, it sometimes inspired them. After a match in Milan seemed to reveal a plot against the Visconti family, 3 nobles were executed based on the evidence of the board. No wonder the church condemned it as the devil's mirror, a game where strategy blurred into sorcery. Now picture a deck of cards where the Queen of Hearts doesn't just lose a round, she loses her head. The next game on our list didn't just unsettle royalty, it plunged entire courts into panic with a single shuffle. The Death Deck wasn't just a game, it was a ticking clock hidden in parchment and ink. Picture a hand-painted deck where the Queen of Spades didn't just mean bad luck, it bore the exact heraldry of the ruling monarch, and drawing it signaled their impending death. This wasn't superstition run wild. It was a pattern that became impossible to ignore. In 1481, King Edward IV of England reportedly laughed off a courtier's draw of the Plague Physician card during a casual game. 3 months later, he died suddenly of what historians now believe was typhoid. Then came the chilling twist. His brother Richard III drew the Crown of Thorns card weeks before his infamous death at Bosworth Field. By the time the deck predicted the assassination of a third ruler, the French King Charles VIII, authorities had seen enough. What made the Death Deck so terrifying was its specificity. Unlike vague tarot symbolism, these cards depicted real events, battles with accurate heraldry, illnesses with documented symptoms, even betrayals by named nobles. Some scholars believe the creator, a disgraced court astrologer, embedded actual political knowledge into the designs, turning the deck into a weapon. Others argue the cards were a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once a ruler saw their fate illustrated, their stress or paranoia made it more likely to come true. Either way, the damage was done. The game's inventor was executed not for fraud, but for treason, with prosecutors claiming the deck stole the breath of kings before their time. Yet traces of the Death Deck linger. Modern Tarot's Tower card, showing a monarch struck by lightning, echoes its imagery, and in 2012, a fragment of what may be an original card surfaced in a Paris archive, a single black barge piece, once believed to foretell a royal death by water. Was it all coincidence, or was there something darker at play in these cards, something that made medieval rulers burn every deck they could find? Now, imagine a game so innocent, even children played it, until the day it turned a nursery rhyme into a royal death warrant. The King's Shadow might sound like child's play until you realize how quickly shadows could turn into sentences. Picture a dimly lit nursery where children giggled as they twisted their hands to cast shapes on the wall. A dog, a bird, maybe a castle. But when a small hand accidentally formed the silhouette of a figure in a crown, then suddenly crumpled as if struck down, that wasn't just a game anymore. To medieval courts, it was a vision. This wasn't just one isolated incident. In 1423, the future King Henry VI of England was just a baby when a nursemaid reported his playmates creating a shadow that mirrored a king falling from horseback. Within months, his father, Henry V, died unexpectedly of dysentery while campaigning in France. Then, in the Spanish court of Castile, young Princess Isabella's attendants banned the game after a servant girl's shadow showed a crowned head rolling. 2 years later, her father, King John II, perished in a mysterious riding accident. What made the king's shadow uniquely terrifying was its simplicity. Unlike elaborate chess sets or weighted dice, this required no tools but a candle and a wall, making it impossible to regulate. Any child, any flickering light, could accidentally summon a prophecy. And because children were seen as pure vessels uncorrupted by deceit, their innocent play carried terrifying weight. Authorities didn't just ban the game, they ordered shutters kept closed at dusk in royal residences, lest a stray shadow betray fate's design. But the darkest twist, some historians suspect courtiers coached children to create specific omens, using their unconscious prophecies as political weapons. When a rival noble's son predicted the French king's death by forming a shadowy sword piercing a crown, the boy's entire family was exiled, not for witchcraft but for treason by illumination. Now, imagine a game where the future wasn't told by shadows or cards, but by the cracks in animal bones, a practice so precise, it allegedly pinpointed the exact week a queen would draw her last breath. The Bone Oracle wasn't just a game, it was a conversation with the unseen, a roll of the dice where the stakes weren't coins but crowns. Picture this, a set of carved ribs and femurs, each etched with cryptic symbols tumbling across a wooden table. A throw showing 3 ravens might hint at famine, a cluster of crossed swords war, but when the bones landed in the dreaded crowns fall pattern, a king's silhouette surrounded by jagged cracks, even the bravest nobles recoiled. This wasn't entertainment, it was a verdict. The game's origins stretched back to ancient pagan rites, where shamans cast bones to read the whims of the gods. By the Middle Ages, it had seeped into royal courts, disguised as diversion, but its reputation for accuracy was its undoing. In 1457, the Duke of Burgundy reportedly banned it after a throw mirrored his sudden fever, right down to the number of days he'd survived. When he died exactly as predicted, the game vanished from polite society overnight. What made the Bone Oracle uniquely dangerous was its dual threat. Not only did it predict doom, but its pagan roots made it heresy in the eyes of the church. Players weren't just gambling with luck, they were dabbling in witchcraft, a charge punishable by fire. Yet the game persisted in shadows, its allure too potent to extinguish. Some historians believe bones were weighted to manipulate outcomes, used by factions to sow fear or justify coups. Others argue the predictions were vague enough to fit any tragedy after the fact, like a horoscope written in marrow. But when King Ferdinand of Aragon outlawed it in 1492, his decree didn't mention fraud. It called the bones a treasonous whisper from the grave, proof that some games didn't just foretell fate, they invited it. Now imagine a tavern packed with drunkards and deserters, where a simple drinking game didn't just reveal who'd pay the next round, but which noble house would fall next. The next game on our list turned alehouse gossip into prophecy, and its accuracy was enough to shutter pubs across the kingdom. The Tavern's curse was the kind of game that started with laughter and ended in hushed terror. Picture this, a group of soldiers and merchants gathered around a sticky wooden table, taking turns sloshing ale from their tankards onto its surface. At first, it was just drunken amusement, reading the foam like tea leaves, joking about love letters or lost coins. But when the bubbles formed a shape too precise to ignore, a crown, a scepter, even a face, the room would go still. Because in 1489, that exact foam crown appeared the night before King Matthias of Hungary dropped dead at a feast. And 3 years later, the same game predicted the death of the Scottish king's heir when the ale pooled into a shape eerily resembling a cradle. Then shattered as if struck. What made this game so volatile wasn't just its predictions, it was where they happened. Unlike courtly chess or dice, this was a peasant's pastime, played in dim corners far from royal control. Rumors spread like ale stains, impossible to contain. When a tavern in Ghent reported a foam pattern matching the Duke of Burgundy's heraldry hours before his assassination, authorities didn't just ban the game. They ordered taverns to serve wine only, hoping to starve the curse of its canvas. But alehouses defied the rules and the prophecies kept coming. Some historians believe bartenders manipulated spills, using grease or tilted tables to create political omens on demand. Others argue the patterns were vague until tragedy gave them meaning, like seeing shapes in clouds after a storm. The real danger lay in how effortlessly it turned gossip into prophecy. A drunken soldier's joke about the king's health could suddenly become true if the ale bubbled strangely, and because the game required no special tools, just a careless sip, it thrived in shadows long after decrees condemned it. By 1520, the church declared even accidental spill readings a sin, punishing offenders with public penance. But try telling that to a room of terrified peasants who just watched their drinks outline a coffin. Now, imagine a game where the roll of dice wasn't just about numbers, but about notes, where every throw composed a melody, and some melodies sounded a little too much like funeral dirges. The next game on our list didn't just predict death, it supposedly sang it into being. The Lute of Fate wasn't just a game, it was a symphony of dread, where every plucked string could pluck a king from his throne. Picture this, a dimly lit chamber, a musician's fingers dancing across the strings, their melody shaped by notes drawn blindly from a velvet bag. A cheerful tune might mean prosperity. A somber refrain, misfortune. But when the notes aligned into the reaper's chord, a progression so haunting it sent shivers down the spines of even hardened courtiers, the room would fall deathly silent. Because in 1488, that exact melody filled the halls of Castle Prague the night before Emperor Frederick III succumbed to a sudden illness. And in 1504, the same game composed a tune resembling a French funeral march 3 days before King Louis XII's heart gave out during a hunt. What made this game so insidious was its artistry. Unlike dice or cards, music bypassed logic, seeping straight into the subconscious. A mournful melody could plant the seed of doom in a monarch's mind, weakening their health through sheer suggestion. Court physicians wrote of rulers struck by melancholy fevers after hearing certain songs, their decline mirroring the music's tempo. The church condemned it as the devil's choir, accusing musicians of channeling forbidden knowledge through their strings. But the real terror lay in its unpredictability. Any court bard, any stray note could accidentally unleash a prophecy. And when King Henry VII's court lutenist drew the sequence known as the Widow's Lament, a tune never before heard, the Queen reportedly fainted. 6 months later, she was dead in childbirth. Yet the Lute of Fate's darkest trick wasn't its accuracy, it was its ambiguity. Unlike chess or dice, music left room for interpretation. A nobleman might hear a battle hymn, his rival a dirge. This vagueness made it the perfect tool for manipulation. Historians now believe factions hired musicians to nudge melodies toward desired outcomes, using the game's reputation to destabilize enemies. When the Duke of Milan banned it in 1521, his decree didn't target fraud. It declared music itself a threat, ordering lutes strung with silk to mute their treasonous tongues. Now imagine a game where words were more dangerous than weapons, where a simple story told by firelight could rewrite a kingdom's future. The next game on our list didn't just predict death, it wove it into legend, one whispered tale at a time. The Storytellers Doom turned bedtime tales into death warrants, where every word could be a king's last. Picture a fireside circle of nobles, passing a goblet like a ticking hourglass. Whoever held it when the embers dimmed had to spin a tale. But these weren't just fables. The rules demanded the hero resemble a living royal, and if the story ended with that character's demise and the real monarch followed suit, that wasn't creativity, it was a crime. In 1403, a French courtier's accidental story about a lion-hearted king slain by treachery spread panic when Henry IV was assassinated weeks later. The storyteller swore it was coincidence, but the crown didn't gamble on chances. He vanished into the dungeons, and the game was outlawed by sunrise. What made this pastime uniquely dangerous was its ambiguity. Unlike dice or bones, stories left no physical evidence, just whispers and chilling déjà vu. A minstrel in Scotland was hanged not for his words, but for the sin of shaping fate after his ballad about a fallen queen preceded Margaret Tudor's stillbirth. Even children's rhymes came under suspicion when a nursemaid's innocent tale about a sleeping prince coincided with young Prince Arthur's fever. She was banished for narrative witchcraft. The real terror lay in how easily fiction bled into reality. Ambitious lords hired poets to craft prophetic tales, using them as psychological warfare. A story about a king drowned in his bath might seem harmless until the real monarch developed a sudden phobia of water, weakening his health through sheer dread. By 1520, the Vatican decreed that any tale mirroring a ruler's death within a year was grounds for excommunication, not because the stories caused the deaths, but because in a world where words held power, narrative itself had become a weapon. Now imagine a game where reflections didn't just show your face, they showed your fate. The next pastime on our list didn't need stories or dice to terrify courts. It needed only a mirror, a candle, and the courage to stare into the abyss. The mirror's omen wasn't just a game, it was a staring contest with destiny itself. Imagine a polished bronze disc, its surface warped just enough to twist candlelight into eerie shapes. Players would whisper names of royals as they gazed, waiting for the metal to answer. A ripple that resembled a crown might mean prosperity, but if the reflection twisted into a skull or worse, the monarch's own face elongated and ghastly, the game was over. And so, some believed, was the ruler's life. This wasn't mere child's play. In 1412, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria reportedly banned the game after a lady-in-waiting's mirror session produced a distorted image of the king's profile with no eyes. Days later, Charles VI of France suffered a bout of madness so severe, chroniclers wrote he could not see his own hand before him. Coincidence? Perhaps, but when the same mirror, held by a different player, later reflected a cracked crown days before Henry V's death at Vincennes, authorities smashed every reflective surface in the palace chapel. What made the mirror's omen uniquely terrifying was its intimacy. Unlike dice or cards, this required no props but what every noblewoman already owned, a looking glass. And because mirrors were believed to trap souls or reveal hidden truths, the game straddled the line between pastime and heresy. The church condemned it as diabolical vanity, accusing players of summoning demons in the sheen of polished metal. But the real danger lay in its simplicity. Any flicker of light, any accidental tilt could reveal a prophecy, and once the idea took root, it festered. After a servant girl in Aragon swore she saw young Prince Juan's reflection, swallowed by shadows, the queen ordered every mirror in the nursery covered in black cloth. The prince died of fever within the year. Now, imagine a game where dice weren't just thrown, they were interrogated, their every bounce and wobble scrutinized like the trembling hands of a witness. The next pastime on our list didn't just predict royal deaths, it put fate itself on trial with numbers as the jury. The divine roll wasn't just a game of chance, it was scripture rewritten in bone and ink. Imagine dice carved not with pips, but with numbers corresponding to verses from the Book of Kings, each toss a potential sermon on royal fragility. A roll of 7 might land on a passage about wisdom and prosperity. But a 13, that could summon the chilling words describing King Ahab's bloody end or Saul's spear-struck downfall. What began as pious entertainment in monastery courtyards soon slithered into royal courts until the day a nobleman's throw aligned perfectly with Ezekiel's prophecy of a crown fallen into dust. Within hours, the king's guards were confiscating every set. This game's power lay in its holy veneer. Unlike pagan bone oracles or shadow games, the divine roll wielded the church's own language, making its prophecies impossible to dismiss as heresy. When young King Charles VIII of France played a round in 1494, and the dice cited 2 Chronicles' warning, "The Lord struck him so that he died," his courtiers didn't laugh. They crossed themselves. 2 years later, he cracked his skull on a door lintel and perished, turning scripture into self-fulfilling terror. The game's ban wasn't just political. The Vatican itself declared it, a mockery of divine will, fearing players might twist sacred texts into weapons. Yet the cruelest twist, some scholars believe the dice were loaded not by scheming nobles, but by monks protesting corruption. In one surviving set, now housed in Oxford's library, the cursed numbers are subtly weighted, suggesting clergy manipulated rolls to send coded warnings to misbehaving monarchs. Whether divine intervention or human cunning, the damage was done. By 1520, even whispering the game's name in some kingdoms could earn you 40 lashes, not for gambling but for tempting God's wrath. Now picture a game where the future wasn't told by dice or scripture, but by the very herbs in a queen's garden. The next pastime on our list didn't just predict death, it bloomed with it, turning petals into portents and roots into ruin. The Herbalists Gamble wasn't just a game, it was a dance of smoke and superstition where the flicker of a flame could rewrite a kingdom's future. Picture this, a darkened chamber, bundles of dried sage and yarrow crackling in a bronze brazier, their fragrant smoke coiling into the air. Players would lean in, squinting as the tendrils twisted into shapes: a crown, a sword, a hunched figure. A wisp that resembled a blooming rose might bring cheers. But when the smoke formed a skeletal hand reaching toward a noble's silhouette, that was no accident. It was a death warrant written in ash. This game's power lay in its duality. On one hand, it was rooted in folk medicine, where healers used smoke patterns to diagnose illness or predict recovery. But in the wrong hands, or the right ones depending on who you asked, it became a political weapon. In 1468, the court of King Edward IV erupted in panic when a casual game produced smoke that mirrored his worsening cough. When he died months later of what historians now suspect was pneumonia, the herbalist Hood Reed the Smoke was arrested not for fraud, but for sowing terror in the royal lungs. The game was banned, but the damage was done. Suddenly, every apothecary's fire was suspect, every curl of smoke a potential treason. What made the Herbalists Gamble uniquely dangerous was its scientific veneer. Unlike blatant divination tools like bones or mirrors, this masqueraded as medicine, making it harder to root out. When Queen Isabella of Castile outlawed it in 1490, her decree didn't just target players, it banned the public burning of 13 specific herbs, from mugwort to vervain, stripping folk healers of their remedies in the process. The message was clear: knowledge was power, and unsupervised wisdom threatened the crown. Yet the cruelest twist, some historians believe the omens were chemical reactions, not magic. Certain herbs, when burned with charcoal or saltpeter, produced predictable shapes, a fact known to alchemists and exploited by schemers. A disgruntled noble might slip a pinch of sulfur into the brazier, ensuring the smoke formed a dagger. Or a royal physician, paid to frighten a king into bed rest, could add lavender to conjure the pale shroud pattern. By the time authorities realized the game was as much chemistry as prophecy, it was too late. The smoke had already clouded reason, and fear had done its work. Now, imagine a game where the turning of the seasons wasn't just celebrated, it was weaponized. The next pastime on our list didn't just predict royal deaths, it tied them to the harvest, the solstice, even the migration of birds, turning nature's rhythms into a countdown to doom. The harvest's warning turned nature itself into a prophet, where every gust of wind could carry a king's doom. Picture this, a crisp autumn afternoon, nobles and peasants alike gathering for the annual harvest festival, laughing as they sifted through drifts of fallen leaves. But this wasn't just idle play. The rules demanded each leaf be held to the light, its veins and tears scrutinized like the lines of a palm. A maple leaf with a jagged edge might hint at coming strife. An oak leaf split down the middle, division in the realm. But when someone uncovered a leaf whose silhouette bore an uncanny resemblance to a crown, especially if it was broken or withered, the celebration would freeze. Because in 1476, that exact shape appeared in a pile outside Westminster days before King Edward IV's sudden illness, and in the Burgundian court of 1491, a servant girl's discovery of a crowned leaf pierced by a thorn coincided with Duke Philip's fatal fall from his horse. What made this game so insidious was its connection to the land. Unlike man-made dice or cards, leaves were beyond control, a message from the earth itself. When Queen Anne of Brittany banned the practice after a child found a crown-shaped leaf stained red with late-season blight, her decree didn't just outlaw the game, it ordered trees near castles pruned to prevent ominous shedding. But roots ran deeper than fear. Peasants whispered that the game was older than kings, a relic of pagan times when the forest spoke through its fallen children. Some historians believe the omens were clever forgeries, rival factions pressing leaves into carved molds to create panic. Others argue the human mind seeks patterns, and tragedy gave meaning to random decay. Yet the game's true danger lay in its timing. Harvest festivals marked the year's tipping point when abundance turned to scarcity, a season already thick with superstition. A cursed leaf found then didn't just predict death, it echoed the land's cyclical dying, tying a monarch's fate to the very soil they ruled. By 1505, the church condemned leaf reading as earthbound heresy, warning that those who listened to dead foliage invited death themselves. But try enforcing that in a world where every autumn breeze scattered fresh prophecies underfoot. Now, imagine a game where the future wasn't written in leaves or smoke, but in water where a single ripple could unravel a dynasty. The next pastime on our list didn't just reflect fate, it drowned kings in their own fears. The water's whisper turned stillness into prophecy with nothing more than a bowl, a stone, and the trembling surface of a liquid mirror. Imagine a hushed circle of courtiers gathered around a silver basin, each dropping a pebble into the water's depths, watching as the ripples collided and twisted into fleeting shapes. A gentle concentric ring might signify peace, but when the waves formed a perfect crown only to shatter against the bowl's edge, the room would erupt in gasps. Because in 1485, that exact pattern appeared in the Venetian court the night before Doge Giovanni Mosnego collapsed mid-speech, poisoned by his own physician. And in England, when a lady-in-waiting stone sent up a spiral resembling a noose, King Henry VII reportedly had the bowl smashed, too late to stop the omen. His eldest son Arthur died within the year. What made this game so unnerving was its eerie reproducibility. Unlike smoke or leaves, water followed immutable laws of physics, making its messages harder to dismiss as chance. When the same spiral pattern emerged in 3 separate courts before 3 royal deaths, even skeptics grew uneasy. The church, torn between dismissing it as pagan nonsense and fearing its accuracy, declared it a theft of God's mystery, accusing players of stealing glimpses of divine will through forbidden science. But the real danger lay in its accessibility. No expensive dice or rare herbs were needed, just a vessel and a puddle. Servants played it in sculleries. Children mimicked it in courtyards, and when a stable boy's game predicted the French queen's miscarriage by forming a teardrop-shaped ripple, authorities didn't just ban the practice, they ordered all ornamental basins in palaces filled with sand to silence the water's treasonous tongue. Yet the darkest twist, some historians believe the omens were orchestrated. A bowl's uneven bottom, a stone's hidden groove, even the temperature of the water could manipulate ripples into desired shapes. Ambitious nobles allegedly hired alchemists to craft weighted whispers pebbles that sank unnaturally, conjuring specific patterns. When one such stone was found carved with tiny channels to direct the flow, its owner was executed not for fraud, but for torturing nature into confession. Now picture a game where threads weren't just stitched into fabric, they were woven into fate itself. The next pastime on our list didn't just predict royal deaths, it embroidered them into existence, one bloody prick of the needle at a time. The thread of fate turned needlework into necromancy, where every stitch could sew a king's destiny. Imagine a sunlit chamber, noble women bent over their embroidery hoops, laughing as they let their needles wander without pattern, a whimsical diversion until the fabric began to speak. A tangle of crimson thread might hint at passion or war, a sudden black cross misfortune. But when an idle stitch accidentally formed the unmistakable outline of a burial shroud, complete with a crown silhouette, the room would fall silent. Because in 1498, that's exactly what happened in Queen Isabella of Spain's court days before her beloved son, Prince Miguel's sudden fever, claimed his life. The embroiderer, a lady-in-waiting with no history of prophecy, swore she'd made no deliberate design. But when the same woman's next random stitching produced a broken scepter weeks before King Manuel of Portugal's near-fatal hunting accident, authorities slashed the hoop from her hands and declared the game a treason of thread. What made this pastime so explosive wasn't just its predictions, it was who wielded them. Embroidery was one of the few arts permitted to noble women, making it the perfect vessel for silent rebellion. A discontented duchess could accidentally stitch a falling crown while smiling demurely at her husband's jests. A maid might weave her mistress's initials into a winding sheet pattern, planting the seed of dread. Unlike dice or cards, this required no tools but what women already owned: needles, thread, and the privacy of their chambers. When Marguerite of Austria outlawed the game after a servant's sampler mirrored her stillborn child's swaddling clothes, the decree revealingly banned unauthorized stitching in royal households, a thinly veiled attempt to control women's gatherings. Yet the darkest thread, some historians believe the omens were anything but accidental. Certain dyes contained trace metals that darkened ominously when exposed to candle smoke or sweat, making designs appear to emerge over time. A disgruntled noblewoman could stitch with sulfate-treated thread, knowing her harmless vines would morph into serpents by week's end. Others suspect the game was a cover for coded messages, a way to spread political warnings under the guise of idle craft. When investigators found a French countess's embroidery frame rigged with hidden guides to shape her random stitches, she wasn't charged with witchcraft, but with plotting with pointed steel. Now imagine a game where the future wasn't sown but scorched, where flames didn't just light the room, but spelled out names in their flickering tongues. The next pastime on our list didn't just predict royal deaths, it etched them in ashes, one crackling ember at a time. The Flames Portant turned candlelight into a crystal ball, where every flicker could spell doom for a dynasty. Picture this, a dim hall filled with nobles, each holding a single taper, watching as the flames danced not for warmth but for warnings. A steady glow meant prosperity. A sudden sputter hinted at misfortune, but when a candle snuffed itself out entirely, especially in a draftless room, that wasn't just bad luck, it was a death sentence written in wax. This game's power lay in its chilling reliability. In 1482, the Duke of Burgundy's court erupted in panic when 3 candles extinguished simultaneously during a match, only for news to arrive hours later that his rival, King Louis XI of France, had succumbed to a stroke. Then, in 1509, Queen Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting reportedly abandoned the game after a candle flame split into two distinct tongues, a phenomenon witnesses swore mirrored the Queen's subsequent miscarriage of twins. Authorities didn't just ban the practice, they ordered palace candlesticks fitted with glass chimneys to tame the fire's treasonous tongue. What made the Flames Portant uniquely terrifying was its scientific plausibility. Unlike vague smoke patterns or leaf shapes, candle flames responded predictably to environmental shifts. Drafts signaled approaching footsteps. Wax quality hinted at temperature changes. Astute players could read these clues like spies intercepting messages. Some historians believe court physicians secretly manipulated conditions, using the game to warn sickly monarchs of their decline without speaking treason. Others argue the omens were self-fulfilling once a flame's behavior was interpreted as fatal. The stress of that belief could hasten the predicted end. Yet the cruelest twist, the game's popularity sealed its fate. Its dramatic visuals made it a favorite at gatherings, ensuring witnesses for every prophecy. When King James IV of Scotland banned it in 1513, his decree didn't target candleplay, it forbade all unauthorized flame interpretation, including torchbearers pausing too long at crossroads. Because in the end, fire didn't just light the medieval world, it spoke to it. Now, imagine a game where the prophets weren't flames or cards, but animals. Where the flutter of a bird's wing or the twitch of a hound's ear could reveal a king's fate. The next pastime on our list didn't just borrow nature's signs, it weaponized them, turning innocent creatures into unwilling oracles. The beast's oracle turned barnyards and aviaries into crystal balls, where every twitch of a whisker or flap of a wing could spell doom for a crown. Picture a courtyard filled with nobles, breath held as they watched a cat stalk shadows not for sport but for prophecy. A bird flying clockwise around the castle might mean prosperity, a hound howling at an empty corner treason. But when a raven landed on the royal falconry glove and refused to budge, as happened in 1493 before King Ferdinand of Naples' sudden abdication, even the bravest knights crossed themselves. This wasn't just superstition, it was nature itself whispering secrets too dangerous to ignore. What made this game so explosive was its unpredictability. Unlike dice or cards, animals couldn't be rigged, or so they thought. When a courtier's prized greyhound reportedly bowed 3 times to an empty throne days before Henry VII's coronation illness, the coincidence was too stark to dismiss. Then came the infamous crowning of the sparrow in 1506, where a songbird fluttered into Westminster Abbey during Mass, alighting on the king's effigy. Within weeks, Henry VII was dead, and the game was outlawed as nature's treason. But banning animals proved impossible. Peasants whispered that barn cats who stared too long at the moon were foreseeing royal deaths, while stable boys swore horses refused to ride toward castles where rulers would soon fall. The darkest twist, some historians believe these omens were staged. Ravens could be lured with hidden treats to land on specific perches. Dogs might be trained to whimper at the scent of certain herbs later found in a doomed monarch's medicinal tea. When investigators discovered a French nobleman's aviary stocked with ravens taught to croak mort at the sight of black-clad figures, the game's facade of innocence shattered. Yet the real terror lay in its accessibility. Unlike elaborate chess sets or forbidden dice, every village had animals, and their prophecies spread like wildfire. By 1522, the church condemned even casual bird-watching near palaces as ungodly augury, warning that Satan spoke through beasts to shake the divine right of kings. Now, imagine a game where the prophecies didn't come from beasts or bones, but from the sleeping mind itself. The next pastime on our list didn't just interpret signs, it invaded the sanctity of dreams, turning midnight visions into daylight terror. The dreamer's dice blurred the line between sleep and prophecy, turning midnight visions into mortal warnings. Imagine a dimly lit chamber where noblemen gathered at dawn, scribbling fragments of their dreams onto parchment before casting bone dice carved with symbols. A crescent moon for betrayal, a tower for downfall, a skeletal hand for death. A roll that matched the dream's imagery wasn't just unsettling. It was considered a direct message from fate itself. In 1499, the Duke of Milan's court erupted in panic when a soldier's dream of a collapsing bridge aligned with a dice roll showing 3 towers and a serpent. Days later, the Duke's favorite general plunged to his death from a besieged fortress walkway. Coincidence? The court didn't wait to find out. The game was banned by sundown. Its dice melted down into chalice fittings to silence their whispers. What made this game uniquely dangerous wasn't just its predictions, it was their source. Dreams were considered sacred, messages from God or the devil, far beyond mortal manipulation. When King Henry VII's astrologer recorded a nightmare about a bleeding crown and rolled dice that mirrored it with a crimson-stained king piece, the king didn't scoff. He doubled his guards and ordered every dream journal in the palace burned. The church, already wary of divination, declared the dreamer's dice a theft of divine visions, accusing players of eavesdropping on heaven's private conversations. But the real threat lay in its intimacy. Unlike public spectacles like flame readings or animal augury, dreams were solitary, impossible to police. A disgruntled servant could dream of a king's demise, roll the dice in secret, and let rumor do the rest. The cruelest twist, some historians believe the dice were rigged with psychological precision. Certain symbols were subtly weighted to land face up, more often towers after battles, serpents during plagues, ensuring omens aligned with current fears. When investigators found a set in Florence with hollowed-out pips filled with mercury, the owner wasn't executed for fraud. He was charged with sowing nightmares into the minds of men, a crime that proved just how deeply medieval rulers feared the power of suggestion. Now imagine a game where the sky itself became a game board, and clouds weren't just passing shapes, they were royal death warrants written in the heavens. The storm's warning turned the heavens into a harbinger of doom, where every gust of wind and crack of thunder could rewrite a kingdom's future. Picture this: nobles gathered on a castle balcony, not to admire the view, but to study the clouds with the intensity of battlefield strategists. A wisp of cirrus streaking like a spear might hint at conflict, a sudden bolt of lightning splitting the sky, divine wrath. But when a courtier's playful prediction of a tempest before the king's birthday came true with a storm so violent it shattered stained glass windows, laughter turned to dread. Because in 1487, that exact scenario preceded King Alfonso of Portugal's fatal riding accident, and the game was outlawed before the rain even stopped. What made this pastime so volatile was its sheer unpredictability. Unlike weighted dice or rigged card decks, the weather answered to no one. When Duke Charles the Bold of Burgundy reportedly joked about a blizzard burying his enemies during a round, only for a freak snowstorm to collapse the roof of his rival's stable days later, even his most skeptical advisors grew uneasy. The church, torn between dismissing it as pagan nonsense and fearing its accuracy, declared the game a theft of God's thunder, accusing players of arrogantly claiming dominion over divine signs. But the real terror lay in its accessibility. Peasants played it in fields, merchants in market squares, turning idle chatter into whispered prophecy. By 1502, King Henry VII's spies were ordered to report anyone reading treason in the clouds, with offenders fined not for gambling but for disturbing the peace of heaven. Yet the cruelest twist, some historians believe the omens were meteorological sleight of hand. Certain nobles timed their predictions to seasonal patterns, forecasting storms during monsoon months or droughts in summer, then took credit when nature complied. Others exploited the placebo effect. A lord who predicted hail the size of crowns could panic farmers into misremembering ordinary ice as portentous. When investigators found a Venetian ambassador's ledger detailing cloud formations before key political deaths, the game's reputation as a cover for espionage was sealed. Now imagine a game where the jingle of coins wasn't just about wealth but about weaving fate itself. The next pastime on our list didn't just predict royal deaths, it minted them in silver and gold, one flip at a time. The coin's judgment turned pocket change into prophecy, where every flip held the weight of a crown. Imagine a silver piece spinning through the air, its glint catching the candlelight before landing with a decisive clink, not to settle a wager, but to seal a monarch's fate. Heads might mean prosperity, tails misfortune, but when the coin landed on its edge, as it did in the court of King James III of Scotland in 1488, the room would freeze. Days later, the king was dead in battle, his reign toppled as abruptly as that precarious balance. Coincidence? The council didn't wait to debate. The game was banned, and the offending coin melted down to mint a chalice to honor God's true will. What made this pastime so dangerous was its brutal simplicity. Unlike elaborate bone oracles or smoke readings, coins were everywhere. Peasants gambled with them, merchants counted them, children played with them. A single flipped penny could spark a rebellion if the right eyes saw it land. In 1495, a Venetian gondolier's casual toss showing tails 3 times in a row coincided with the Doge's sudden illness, prompting authorities to outlaw all unauthorized divination by currency. Even the church, usually eager to dismiss pagan rituals, took notice when a priest's coin landed edge first during a sermon on divine judgment. The bishop declared it not luck, but a mockery of heaven's scales. Yet the darkest twist lay in how easily the game could be rigged. Coins filed slightly off balance, warmed to stick to surfaces, or tossed onto uneven ground could predict anything a manipulator desired. Historians now suspect factions used weighted coins to spread fear, ensuring certain outcomes before key political events. When a disgruntled baron's servant was caught with a purse of flattened pennies, each prone to landing upright, his confession revealed a chilling truth: the omens were never chance. They were weapons sharpened by superstition and hurled straight at the throne. Now, picture a game where innocence itself became a threat, where children's sing-song rhymes didn't just foretell doom, but seemed to summon it. The next pastime on our list didn't need coins or cards to terrify courts. It needed only the laughter of the young and the eerie precision of their unthinking words. The Nursery's curse turned lullabies into prophecies, where the innocent hum of children's voices could send shivers down the spines of kings. Picture a sunlit courtyard, little ones clapping hands to a familiar rhyme until the verses twisted into something darker. A line about the king losing his crown might have been harmless once, but when sung days before Henry VI of England was deposed in 1461, the game became treason in disguise. Authorities didn't just ban the rhyme, they hunted down every child who'd sung it, forcing their families to swear oaths of silence, because in medieval courts, even playtime could be a plot. What made this pastime so unsettling was its sheer innocence. Unlike weighted dice or rigged card decks, children couldn't be accused of scheming. Their rhymes were folk traditions passed down like heirlooms, making their sudden accuracy all the more terrifying. In 1494, a group of Spanish choir boys chanting about a rose that would never bloom were whipped after Infanta Isabella's stillbirth, not because they'd cursed her, but because their song had invited the evil eye. The church, torn between dismissing it as superstition and fearing its power, declared certain nursery rhymes unholy echoes, warning they could summon demons if sung out of season. Yet the darkest twist, some historians believe these rhymes were political tools. Ambitious nobles reportedly taught children altered verses, using their purity as cover to spread dissent. A French chronicle recounts a duke's servant bribing a nursemaid to teach a rhyme about the fox taking the lion's den, weeks before a coup toppled King Charles VIII's regent. When investigators found scrolls of corrected lyrics in a disgraced lord's treasury, the game's facade of innocence crumbled. Now, imagine a game where shadows didn't just follow you, they foretold your fate. The next pastime on our list didn't need rhymes or dice to terrify courts. It needed only a candle, a wall, and the courage to face what the light revealed. The Sundial's Omen didn't just measure time, it seemed to steal it from kings. Picture a sun-drenched courtyard, nobles clustered around an ornate sundial, not to tell the hour, but to read their fates in the creeping shadows. The rules were deceptively simple. As the sun moved, players would mark where the shadow touched carved notches along the dial's edge. A shadow stretching to the harvest symbol might promise abundance. But when it halted at the skull-marked notch, especially if it lingered there unnaturally long, even the bravest courtiers would recoil, because in 1499, that's exactly what happened in the court of King James IV of Scotland. The shadow froze at the death symbol for 3 full minutes, despite the sun's movement. A week later, the king's brother collapsed during a joust, his heart pierced by a splintered lance. Coincidence? The council didn't wait to decide. The sundial was smashed and the game banned as a theft of God's own clock. What made this pastime uniquely terrifying was its scientific veneer. Unlike bone throwing or smoke reading, sundials were tools of scholars and astronomers, lending their prophecies an air of unshakable truth. When Queen Isabella of Castile's courtiers recorded a shadow that split into 2 distinct lines, a phenomenon impossible under normal circumstances, days before her daughter's twin stillbirths, even the royal astrologer couldn't dismiss it as mere superstition. The church, usually quick to condemn divination, hesitated here. How could they denounce an instrument that measured divine creation itself? Instead, they declared the game a corruption of celestial mechanics, accusing players of twisting sacred geometry into heresy. Yet the darkest twist lay in the game's potential for manipulation. A sundial's accuracy depended on perfect leveling. A tilt of just 1 degree could distort shadows dramatically. Historians now suspect disgruntled courtiers tampered with dials, subtly angling them to produce omens on demand. When investigators found a French noble's sundial with a hidden mercury pool beneath its base, allowing the entire slab to tilt when heated, the game's reputation as a tool of treason was sealed. Now, imagine a game where the breaking of bread didn't just feed the hungry, it foretold the fate of dynasties. The next pastime on our list turned something as humble as a loaf into a window onto doom. The baker's prophecy turned ovens into oracles, where every loaf held a secret message waiting to rise. Imagine pulling a steaming loaf from the hearth, only to find the crust cracked in the unmistakable shape of a broken crown. Not just bad baking, but a dire warning scribed in flour and fire. This wasn't mere peasant superstition. In 1489, a French baker's loaf split exactly this way days before King Charles VIII's sudden collapse during a tennis match. The court didn't dismiss it as coincidence. They arrested the baker not for treason but for kneading fate into dough, and ordered every loaf in the palace sliced open under guard. What made this game so insidious was its disguise as mundane labor. Unlike forbidden dice or smoky divination, baking was essential, happening in every home and monastery. A servant could accidentally overproof dough until it burst into ominous shapes, then claim innocence. When a loaf in Queen Isabella's kitchen formed a cross-shaped fissure before her son's death in 1497, authorities didn't just ban the game. They decreed all bread must be baked in plain round loaves, no scoring allowed to starve the devil's handiwork. Yet the real terror lay in the flour itself. Some historians believe bakers mixed rye contaminated with ergot, a fungus causing hallucinations, making cracks appear to move or form faces. Others suspect hot bricks were placed strategically in ovens to manipulate heat patterns. When a disgraced court baker confessed to using a hidden iron mold to imprint shapes, his punishment revealed the game's true danger. He wasn't burned for witchcraft, but hanged for counterfeiting God's will in wheat. Now picture a game where ropes didn't just bind, they prophesied, where a single knot could unravel a kingdom's future. The knot's warning wasn't just a game, it was a language of loops and twists, where every coil and tuck could spell a kingdom's fate. Picture a bustling marketplace, sailors and farmers passing rough hemp ropes between them, tying knots not for utility but for prophecy. A simple overhand knot might hint at a traveler's safe return. But when 3 loops formed in succession, mirroring the twists of a noose, that wasn't just craft, it was a death sentence woven in rope. This pastime's power lay in its tactile simplicity. Unlike elaborate dice or smoke readings, ropes were everywhere: ship rigging, livestock tethers, even the cords binding books. Anyone could play, and anyone could whisper the results. In 1491, a fisherman in Brittany tied a knot that eerily resembled the intertwined serpents of the Medici crest. Days later, Lorenzo de Medici succumbed to gout, and the game spread like wildfire through ports and villages. Authorities didn't just ban it, they ordered all ropes in royal precincts inspected for treasonous tangles, with offenders flogged for binding the future without leave. Yet the darkest twist, some knots didn't just predict, they seemed to invite. When a stable boy's playful braid formed a perfect crown shape before King John of Denmark's sudden fall from his horse, witnesses swore the rope had pulsed in his hands like a living thing. The church, already wary of pagan knot magic, declared it the devil's handshake, warning that every loop stole breath from God's chosen. But try policing every length of twine in a kingdom. The game persisted in shadows, its prophecies coiled tight as hangman's knots. Now imagine a game where colors weren't just shades, they were omens, where a splash of crimson or a stroke of black could paint a king's doom before it struck. The Dyer's curse wasn't just a game, it was a canvas of terror, where every splash of pigment could paint a king's doom. Picture a sunlit workshop, artisans laughing as they mixed crushed lapis and madder root, watching colors swirl in ceramic bowls until the liquid darkened into a shade too ominous to ignore. A vibrant crimson might symbolize passion or war, but when a vat of dye settled into the exact murky purple of a bruise, the kind that appeared on King Louis XII's corpse after his sudden fall. That wasn't artistry anymore, it was a prophecy steeped in dye. This pastime's danger lay in its disguise as craft. Unlike forbidden dice or bone oracles, dye making was essential labor, practiced openly in every market town. A merchant could accidentally overmix indigo until it blackened like a storm cloud, then claim it was just poor technique. When a batch prepared for Queen Joanna of Castile's wedding robes curdled into the gray-green of rotting flesh days before she succumbed to a fever, authorities didn't just ban the game. They ordered dyers to work blindfolded, lest their eyes catch death in the vat. Yet the true horror wasn't in the predictions, but in the cultural void left behind. With dye mixing now suspect, entire techniques for rare hues vanished as artisans feared prosecution for creating ill-omened colors. A generation of vibrant greens and deep violets disappeared from tapestries, their formulas lost to superstition. The cruelest twist, some historians believe the cursed dyes were sabotaged. Certain minerals, when added to vats, reacted unpredictably. Copper sulfate could turn azure into sickly yellow, while iron filings darkened reds to blood black. A disgruntled noble might bribe a dyer to spike a rival's batch, ensuring the resulting omen would spread panic. When investigators found a Florence workshop stocked with jars labeled King's Sallow and Widow's Mauve, the owner wasn't burned for witchcraft. He was charged with harboring treason in pigment, proof that even beauty could be weaponized. Now we arrive at the final forbidden game, one so potent it wove together every element we've explored: the randomness of dice, the symbolism of chess, the dread of dreams. This wasn't just a pastime, it was a mirror held up to fate itself, and what it reflected sent kingdoms into lockdown. The Grand Oracle wasn't just a game, it was the culmination of every medieval terror about prophecy made real. Imagine a velvet-lined box opening to reveal a set of gilded dice, a deck of cards painted with astrological symbols, and a small circular mirror polished to a supernatural sheen. Players would cast the dice to select a card, then hold that card before the mirror, where the reflection would supposedly reveal a hidden truth, a face, a symbol, sometimes even a whispered name. But when the reflection showed King Philip of Burgundy's likeness with a dagger at his throat, and he was found stabbed in his bedchamber 3 days later, the game ceased to be entertainment. It became a crime punishable by fire. What set the Grand Oracle apart wasn't just its accuracy, it was its ambition. Unlike singular games of chance or dream interpretation, this wove every known divination method into one terrifying tapestry. The dice determined fate, the cards framed it, and the mirror, always the mirror, made it undeniable. In 1496, Queen Isabella's inquisitors uncovered a set where the mirror's backing had been scraped thin enough to project hidden images when held to candlelight. The prophecies were meticulously staged, yes, but the effect was the same. Panic so profound that entire kingdoms purged their courts of reflective surfaces. The church, usually divided on such matters, united in calling it the Devil's Triptych, a trifecta of heresy that corrupted chance, art, and God's own light. Yet the cruelest irony, the Grand Oracle's creators likely never intended it as a weapon. Historians now believe it began as an elaborate philosophical exercise, a way to explore how humans impose meaning on randomness. But in the hands of the desperate or the cunning, it became something far darker. When the French king's brother died of a fever hours after the game showed his reflection dissolving like mist, even skeptics couldn't dismiss the timing. The game's inventors weren't just executed, their tongues were removed before burning, a grim warning against speaking fate into being. This, perhaps, is why these games struck such fear into medieval hearts. They weren't just predicting the future, they were rifling through the divine ledger, pulling back the curtain on a world where rulers clung to power by the thinnest of threads. In an age of plagues and coups, where a single bad harvest could topple a dynasty, the idea that fate could be reduced to a roll of dice or a flipped card wasn't just unsettling. It was revolutionary. If a peasant's hand could reveal a king's death as easily as a priest's prayer, what did that say about the natural order? The bans weren't about stamping out fun, they were about control. By outlawing these games, monarchs weren't just silencing omens. They were insisting that the future remained theirs alone to shape, that not even the universe itself could scribble in the margins of their destiny. Yet in their desperation to erase these prophecies, they immortalized them. Every burned deck, every shattered mirror, every executed fortune teller became proof that the games had touched a nerve too raw to ignore. Because deep down, beneath the crowns and the catechisms, medieval rulers understood the terrifying truth these games revealed. That fate laughs at kings as easily as it does at beggars, and no decree can silence the rattle of dice in the dark. Cultural impact. These banned games weren't just idle distractions, they were threads woven into the very fabric of medieval power. To understand why rulers feared them, you have to grasp how deeply play and prophecy intertwined in a world where every sneeze might be an omen and every dream a message from God. Games weren't merely entertainment, they were microcosms of the universe's hidden order, where a roll of dice could echo divine judgment and a shuffled deck might lay bare heaven's plans. When a king banned a game, it wasn't about morality, it was about survival. Because in an era where legitimacy hinged on divine right, any hint that fate could be toyed with by peasants tossing bones or children humming rhymes struck at the heart of royal authority. The suppression of these games reveals a paradox at the core of medieval rule. Monarchs wielded absolute power, yet lived in constant fear of unseen forces, plagues, rebellions, or worse, the whispered prophecy that might spark them. Take the infamous Tables of Fate chess variant. Its banishment after predicting Prince Edward's death wasn't just panic. It was a calculated move to squash the idea that destiny could be decoded over a game bored by anyone but court astrologers. By outlawing these pastimes, rulers weren't just silencing potential threats, they were reinforcing the illusion that only they could commune with the divine. The Church's eager cooperation in these bans, branding games as heresy or witchcraft, wasn't coincidental. It was a partnership. If peasants believed their dice rolls held cosmic significance, what stopped them from questioning why God let kings rule? Yet the most fascinating legacy of these games isn't in their bans, it's in what they birthed. Modern playing cards still carry echoes of the Death Deck's ominous symbolism. The Tower card in Tarot mirrors those forbidden, falling crown motifs. Even childhood games like Ring Around the Rosie likely descend from Plague-era omens masked as nursery rhymes. Superstitions we dismiss today, avoiding walking under ladders, knocking on wood, were once deadly serious rituals to ward off the kind of fate these games seem to invoke. And consider how casinos still thrive on the thrill of chance, that same tantalizing whisper that maybe, just maybe, luck can be harnessed. The medieval mind would nod knowingly. They knew the allure and the danger of that belief all too well. What do these stories teach us? That human nature hasn't changed, only our excuses. Medieval rulers blamed games for upheavals we now attribute to economics or politics. But the impulse is identical. Control the narrative, and you control the fear. When a modern politician dismisses polls as fake news, or a corporation sues a whistleblower, they're playing the same old game, silencing what threatens their power. The tools have evolved, but the stakes remain life and death. Perhaps that's why these forbidden games still haunt us. They're reminders that power has always been fragile, that rulers sleep uneasy when their people start rolling dice or reading signs. Because once you admit fate might be a game anyone can play, who's to say the next throw won't topple a throne? From dice to dreams, these 25 forbidden games reveal a truth far stranger than fiction, that in the shadows of medieval courts, play was never just play. It was a battleground where kings and queens waged war against the unknown, terrified that a roll of the bones or a twist of smoke might undo their divine right to rule. But peel back the layers and you'll find something even more profound. These games weren't just banned because they predicted deaths. They were outlawed because they exposed the fragility of power itself. Think about it. In a world where monarchs claimed authority directly from God, the idea that a peasant's dice toss or a child's nursery rhyme could reveal their fate was revolutionary. It undermined the very foundation of their rule. When King Henry VII burned every copy of the Death Deck after it foretold his son's passing, he wasn't just erasing a game, he was trying to erase the idea that fate could be democratized. Because if destiny could be read in a deck of cards, what stopped rebels from shuffling their own future? Yet the irony is delicious. In their desperation to control these games, medieval rulers immortalized them. Every decree, every burning, every terrified whisper about cursed dice or prophetic shadows only cemented their power in the cultural imagination. The games became legends, their stories passed down like secret spells. Even today, echoes linger in the way we still knock on wood to avoid tempting fate, or how a spilled salt shaker sends shivers down spines. These weren't just medieval quirks. They were survival tactics from an era where the line between luck and doom was paper thin. So what's the real lesson here? That games have always been mirrors. They reflect not just our desire to win, but our need to make sense of a chaotic world. When you shuffle a deck of cards or roll a 20-sided die today, you're part of an ancient tradition, one that rulers once feared could topple kingdoms. And that's the magic of it. The next time you play, remember, you're holding something that once made kings tremble. If this journey into the shadows of forbidden games left you spellbound, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden corners. Got a historical mystery you're itching to unravel? Drop it in the comments. We're always hunting for the next great story. Until then, keep rolling the dice, drawing the cards, and questioning the hidden rules of the games we play. After all, history's greatest secret might just be hiding in plain sight on your tabletop.